Welcome to Freedom Fighter Net. I'm Don Klein. This is Wednesday, December 3rd, 2014, and we got a real problem, folks. We got a real problem. If we don't stop this in its tracks right now, we're going to lose a lot of rights. We're going to be held to pay. Listen, did anyone notice all the celebration over the Republican, pretty much of a sweep in the last midterm elections? Did you, because of all that celebration, did you ignore the fact that Washington State has just passed an initiative called I-594, which they voted, gun owners actually voted for this. It severely restricts their right to keep and bear arms. It restricts their right to privacy. It destroys their Fourth Amendment right to be secure from unwarranted searches and seizures. It destroys their right to due process before their rights are taken away. It destroys the 10th Amendment, which talks about how the federal government can't do anything it's not delegated the power to do. And it also, the 10th Amendment also prohibits the states from doing anything that the Constitution prohibits them from doing. And the Second Amendment prohibits them from interfering with the right to keep and bear arms. All of these things it did, and everybody seems to think that, oh, well, because we've got universal background checks, it's all okay. Well, it's not okay. The whole thing is a fraud and a scam. The background checks that were first established on for firearm dealers in the Gun Control Act of 1968 was set up specifically. It was a wedge in the door, a foot in the door, so that this situation today could then be accomplished. They can't get rid of our right to keep and bear arms. They've tried several times and they keep failing. So now they're going to try to get rid of our Fourth and Fifth and 10th Amendment rights to a government that obeys the Constitution, figuring that if we can destroy those rights, then all of our rights come under the heading of compelling government interest, and government can do anything they dang well want to do. It doesn't work that way, folks. This law is absolutely a fraud. The Gun Control Act of 1968 needs to be repealed, or actually needs to be rescinded, because it's totally unconstitutional right from the word go. And this is really going to be a real problem. A bunch of extremely wealthy leftists, subversives, I call them enemy agents. I've made some notes here. Led by billionaire former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, pumped $10 or $12 million into the campaign in Washington State to get that law passed out, and the local gun people couldn't generate more than about $600,000, and all they ever did was introduce I-591, which supposedly banned all federal gun control laws, and of course nobody voted for that at all. They've suckered the voters of Washington State, and now they've set their sights on Nevada, and they've set their sights on Arizona after that. I want to tell you, here's the fundamental premise our government is based upon. Our nation, our whole our governmental structure is based upon this. A fundamental premise upon which our constitutional rule of law is based. Rights are not subject to initiatives or referendums. We don't have a democracy in this country. We have a constitutional republic, and the Democratic majority does not have the authority to take rights away from the private citizens. A law that violates private rights is without substance and without authority, and it is called mere color of law. It looks like a law, it sounds like a law, but it's invalid from the moment of its inception, according to the Supreme Court ruling in Marbury versus Madison. That's 5 U.S. 137. Look it up. It was in 1803. No one may be lawfully bound to obey a law that is null and void from the moment of its inception. But they'll put you in jail if you don't, so that's why we've got to stop this before it turns into a total dictatorship tyranny. I-594 is a subversive enemy action against our constitutional form of government, pure and simple. If we don't stop it in its tracks, it's going to set a precedent in which all of our rights are mere privileges we might be allowed to exercise, but only if the judiciary deems it in government's compelling interest. Leftist control freaks in government have been trying to take away our right to keep and bear arms for nearly a century now. It inhibits their control over the people. It prevents them from taking the tyranny to the excess that they would like to take it. And so they've been chipping away at it increment by increment since the 1900s. In 1968, they took a new tack. They passed legislation the federal government has absolutely zero authority to pass, called the Gun Control Act of 1968. It mandated licensing of firearm dealers, created a class of persons prohibited from possessing firearms, and mandated background checks of anyone seeking to purchase a firearm from a dealer, none of which is authorized by the Constitution. Background checks? The Second Amendment says keeping and bearing arms is a right. Do you know of any other right that requires an interrogation under penalty of perjury, under the threat of criminal sanctions, before you can be allowed, before you can be given permission to exercise it? That's ridiculous. In fact, the background check starts with filling out a Form 4473, which is a government-mandated interrogation under penalty of perjury. That's a compelled search, people. And it is followed by a NICS search of your papers and effects, your records, all of which are prohibited under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, unless there's probable cause of a crime having taken place and probable cause that you committed the crime. Buying a gun is not a crime, and it's not probable cause of a crime. This demand for private information and the search of your records, your papers and effects that follows is not based on a warrant or probable cause. It's a search looking for probable cause to deny you your rights. Are you going to allow government to do that to you? The Constitution says government can't do that to you or anyone else. No one has a right to vote for it. Well, you have a right to vote for it, but it's irrelevant if you do, because you don't have the authority to pass that sort of thing. The Fourth Amendment says, and I'm quoting here, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized." End quote. The Fourth Amendment isn't the only thing violated by this subversive initiative. The Fifth Amendment, in pertinent part, says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." Liberty, rights. Rights are liberties. They are not given by government, they are our birthright, and the Constitution simply recognizes them. Government demanding an interrogation, or even the people demanding an interrogation under penalty of perjury and conducting a search as a precondition to allowing you to exercise the right is not due process. It is a tyranny, and it leads to greater tyranny. Are you going to vote to allow government to take your right to due process away from you? If you do, what rights have you got left? Believe it or not, there's more. The 10th Amendment says, "The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." That's us. It prohibits the states. The states are prohibited from exercising gun control over firearms, the right to keep and bear arms, by the Second Amendment. So therefore, the states don't have any right to do this either. And by the way, here's an interesting point. The states can tell you where you can shoot. It can tell you what the safety regulations have to be. It can tell you what the self-defense terminology and parameters are, but it cannot tell you that you cannot keep and bear arms. That's the whole point here. There's a distinction. The use of the arm or the keeping and bearing of arms. They can tell you how you can use it. They cannot tell you how you can keep and whether you can keep and bear it or not. Even without the Second Amendment, do you see anywhere in the U.S. Constitution the federal government has delegated the authority to even license firearms dealers? Gun Control Act of 1968 is a sham. It's a fraud. It gives government power, or purports to give government power, that the Constitution doesn't allow government to have. So this is a fraud. This results in a rogue occupation government that has no lawful authority whatsoever. Do you see anywhere in the U.S. Constitution the federal government has delegated the authority to issue or deny anyone permission to purchase a firearm? For any reason? or to monitor, register, oversee, database the information on, or interfere in any way with anyone's right to keep and bear arms, or exercise any other right. These are rights. These are not privileges granted by government. These are rights. Government has nothing to say about it. Government cannot reach those rights. Norton versus Shelby said so too, by the way. In addition to the federal government's total lack of any authority whatsoever to even take note of the private ownership of firearms, the Second Amendment says, and I quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The militia is necessary to the security of a free state, and therefore the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Not by the federal government, not by the state government, not by any county, municipal, or other local government, not by any corporate legal fiction created by government, and not by any private citizen. Thus, the 10th Amendment prohibits state governments the power to infringe upon the right of the people to keep and bear arms. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was and is a fraudulent piece of legislation wholly without merit and wholly without lawful authority to be enforced at the state or federal level. It violates the 4th, 5th, and 10th Amendments, and it is an a priori restraint on the Second Amendment. And now billionaire Michael Bloomberg and his leftist cronies are trying to ram it down our throats for every transfer of a firearm, even a temporary one between buddies. You know what? It was planned to do this. It was planned to come to this when the Gun Control Act of 1968 was originally written. It was never intended to prevent crime. It was intended to put a wedge in the door of our rights. Because with this, if this goes through, we've lost everything. We've lost all of our rights. All the government has to do is say, well, we have a compelling interest that's more important than your rights. We can't allow that to happen. Now, you may think this significant loss of rights and overall liberty is worth it to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and the criminal element, but I certainly don't. Have you ever heard of a background check stopping a mental defective from shooting up a school or a shopping mall or whatever? This wouldn't stop them, and it hasn't stopped them, ever. What stops them are the presence of firearms in law-abiding hands. In fact, what would stop them more than probably, most effectively, right off the bat, would be getting rid of the gun-free zone signs. They've never attacked a school or a shopping mall or anywhere else unless there was a gun-free zone sign there, where you're not allowed to carry weapons, because they don't like, you know, they don't like resistance. They want a captive audience. That alone would reduce the number of massacres to a vanishingly small number, as low as they are now. Now, in closing, I want to make a couple of observations, and I hope you will listen. I don't think most of you are activists for constitutional rights like I am, and most of you haven't got time to do the research and pay attention to what's really going on behind the scenes like I have for the last 40 years. So I hope my observations over the last 40 years will be of value. It may sound like hyperbole, but I've been observing the political destruction of our nation of liberty ever since I came back from Australia in 1974. I couldn't figure out why America was just like Australia. It's not supposed to be. America's supposed to be a free country. Australia was a communist country, believe it or not, run by practically card-carrying communists. They believed everything there was to do, everything there was to believe about the Marxist Communist Manifesto. It's clear to me we are suffering an overt, concerted, orchestrated insurrection against our liberties the nation was founded to preserve and protect. I won't go into details here, but what boils down to is that there are a number of very, very powerful people in this world to whom the simple concept of personal citizen liberty sticks in their craw. They cannot abide the fact that Americans have the unmitigated gall to tell them, the self-appointed rifle masters of humanity, to go piss up a rope. We fought off their ancestors in the American Revolution, and our enemy in that conflict, the Great Britain, was and is today their wholly owned subsidiary, just as now we are. Put simply, they want their colonies back. They circulated a letter in around 1934, 1938, somewhere around in there, in which they said they intended to regain economic control by 1900, and they intended to regain political control by the year 2000. Well, they were 13 years late regaining economic control with the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th and 17th Amendments that were not ratified, by the way. And it looks like they're about 14 years late regaining political control, but they're awfully close. They're real close to executing their final battle plan. Our nation is founded on the principle that individual liberty trumps the whim of kings and princes, and the consent of the governed trumps the divine right of kings to govern. As long as we are armed, we can withhold consent to being governed by tyranny. Do you see the motive of those who oppose the civilian ownership of firearms? They don't want us to be able to defend ourselves. Let's put it simply. We are in the final stages of an insurrection against the first, only, and possibly the last, if they get their way, nation in the history of the planet to be founded on principles of liberty. There are only two reasons they haven't executed their final plan already. The first is that they're not always in concert with one another. There's a lot of dissension and infighting among their own groups. The second is, every time they try to render us helpless with really draconian gun control laws, the number of firearms in private hands nearly doubles before the law goes into effect. And sometimes it doesn't go into effect at all, like last year when Harry Reid tried to pass another Pelosi-type or Dianne Feinstein-type massive gun control law through the Senate. They found out, we told them, we will not comply. And they suddenly discovered they didn't have the votes to pass it. You know, our pushback on that astonishes these people. I don't mean just the U.S. Senate. I'm talking about the people in the world who are really trying to restore our nation to a feudal satrapy. They don't understand liberty. They don't understand the rule of law. To them, liberty means unaccountability. They are, without exception, narcissists who recognize no higher authority than self. We're getting really close to the final stage, the tipping point, when the rogue occupation government goes public with its agenda and dares the people to do anything about it. You might remember, you might have noticed just recently, Obama going public with his lawlessness on the immigration issue and daring the Republicans to do anything about it. If he gets away with that, the next step he takes is going to take our breath away and most of our liberties, if we're not prepared to fight for them. This is why we have the right to keep and bear arms in the first place, to keep government from violating our rights under the rule of law. We have a right and a duty to keep this from happening. We must reject universal background checks at every opportunity, and we must repeal the Gun Control Act of 1968 that started the whole thing. Either that or have it struck down, or strike it down by acclamation. We will not comply. All power, political power, flows from the people. We have the authority to say we are not going to comply with unlawful color of law. We need to put the United States government back into its constitutional box. If we don't, we will lose every right our nation was founded to preserve and protect, and the payback for 238 years of rejecting those who considered themselves our rightful masters will then begin. It won't be pretty for us or for them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. I want to make a quote here at the final. If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen. That was Samuel Adams, Philadelphia State House, August 1st, 1776. Disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer, though I played one in court against a Department of Injustice attorney, and I won. Nothing on this site should be considered legal. Nothing I've said here should be considered legal advice. Take no action or omit no action based on what you find in this video. If you want to need legal advice, consult your own law dog or legal beagle. You don't believe anything the law dog says. Give what your legal beagle says in writing. Then you have grounds to act on it, even if he's making up it as he goes along. And they do. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.